Monster Seminary.
Yeah, are you surprised?
I am. Like, I'm
No,
very
no,
surprised
no,
at how many people are like, oh, her crazy
no.
is cool.
Yeah,
What
yeah,
does that say about us?
yeah,
Well,
no.
welcome to Monster Seminary. Um, I am really excited, and I hope we can get through all of it because um, it's a whole lot, like I usually do, but I think it'll be really fun. So, um, it's six. So I know Vanessa said she was coming, and other folks said they were coming, but we're gonna go ahead and get started. Um, Reverend Prince, you want to pray a non-heretical prayer since the rest of this is.
Uh, okay. Dearest God, we thank you for this time. Show us the way. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Amen.
Oh, I love
Amen.
y'all. Thank y'all for putting up with me. Okay. So we really are calling it Munster Seminary, and I'm calling it Munster Seminary because when I was at one of Salahuddin's appointments today, they had Munster University on, and I was like, yes, that's exactly what we're doing, except it's Bible. So this is Munster Seminary, and our goal, and I learned how to do this weekend, is to engage the Bible with a different lens. And I'm going to start just off top. I love the Bible. Like, I really, really do love all of the different parts of the Bible. I love it for what it's worth. I love it for what people think it's worth. Um, and to me, it's more than just something that we beat people over the head with. It's a book of stories. It is so much more richer, richer. It's richer than what we give it credit for. And so, what I'm trying to do with this is to push us to actually read the Bible as a cultural tool to see what it tells us about the people who wrote it, the people who appreciated it, and the culture from which the Bible came out of. So, we're going to look at the Munsters in the Bible. So, the requirements is to suspend your personal hermeneutic. However, it is that you typically approach the Bible, whatever it is that you typically see when you open the Bible, whether you're looking for where is God in this, how is God speaking to me, where is salvation, where is deliverance, what does God say to me in this moment, lose it. We're not doing that tonight. Whether it's a hermeneutic of suspicion that says, okay, I have to look for where the power is, how the power dynamics are at play, lose it. We're not doing that tonight. If it's a hermeneutic of liberation, how are we overturning those power structures? Where are the voices of the powerless? We're not doing that. None of that. So lose your personal hermeneutic and be willing to see something different, be willing to see the cultural dynamics. And that means, like every other Bible study, my goal is to show us Jesus, right? Like my goal in life, my job is to point the way to Jesus. I'm not doing that tonight. I'm pointing the way to the Munsters. And so this is not a one-on-one on how to be saved. This is not an opening the door to the blood of Jesus. We're not doing that. And I'm not gonna, do Jesus as a vampire this time. But I'm asking you to be willing to actually see the text as a text instead of the typical ways that we would view the Bible. And part of that is to see the cultural dynamics. The Bible is a group of texts written over centuries for specific people for specific reasons. And some of those reasons are to tell us and to tell them about their faith journey and who God is in their midst. But some of them one of those reasons is to solidify their culture, to solidify what is going on and who they say they are. And so what we are looking for is monsters. Because monsters function within the context of culture in opposition to who is in the culture. They are the other, right? They're the ones that we don't want to be like. They're the ones that stand outside of us. They're the ones who help us identify who we are and who we're not. And who we are helps us to understand who God is for us, right? So that's the end goal. But we're not looking for evil. We're not looking for sin, because evil and sin are theological categories that we superimpose upon other things. So we can look and see even the sacrifice of Isaac as evil, right? because we would never sacrifice our own child. But that tells a different story. And so what we're looking for is, where are the monsters? These things that stand between God and culture, these things that don't really have a defined category, that we don't know what we would do with. They're not human, they're not creature, they're not divine. What are they? More so than how are humans, or how are even creatures, how are these entities behaving badly? We're not looking for that. We're looking for what they are and the stories that they have to tell us. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
I'm
Mm-hmm.
gonna need y'all to talk back.
Yes, yes.
Okay, so we're looking for the things that exist in the spaces between. The things that exist in, we call them the liminal spaces. I call them the interstitial spaces. The spaces where humans are uncomfortable because humans don't belong there. But the spaces that we cannot clearly also identify as God. That's what we're looking for. So things that aren't critters, things that aren't angels, things that might be but maybe not, things that just don't sound normal or natural to us, things that make us uncomfortable. That's what we're looking for. That's what a monster is. And so I want to read from the Wisdom of Solomon, which is the beginning of the heresy of this Bible study. It's part of the Apocrypha. And I want to read for Solomon what wisdom does to nature and how God twists and turns it. Because I think that this description of what Solomon in this particular not canonical book says, that this type of wisdom is what the monster does. Okay? So it's Solomon, Wisdom of Solomon 19, verses 18 through 21. I've got my real Bible and not the phone because I don't think it's on there. So for the elements change places with one another. As on a harp, the notes vary the nature of the rhythm while each note remains the same. This may be clearly inferred from the sight of what took place. For land animals were transformed into water creatures, and creatures that swim moved over to the land. Fire, even in water, retained its normal power, and water forgot its fire-quenching nature. Flames, on the contrary, failed to consume, and the flesh of perishable creatures that walked among them failed to burn, nor did they melt the crystalline, quick-melting kind of heavenly food. So in the presence of monsters, in the presence of these creatures that exist in interstitial spaces, things don't act right. And we have to begin to think differently about who we are and who God is. And that's the purpose of the monster, is to push us beyond our normal, to push us into something new. So that's why we're seeking the monsters of the Bible. I thought it would be fun. I had a whole lot of fun preparing it. And because, again, as I said in my last post, the number one movie is a horror movie directed by a Black woman. We gonna do what we gonna do. So that's why we're doing this. Any questions before we get started? My screen sharing paused because my Mac hates me. Any questions before we get started? All right. So this is an interactive Bible study. Y'all know I do not do lectures, even though I got slides. So that means y'all gonna have to participate, whether you're on camera or not. So, okay. So the first monster that I want to talk about, nobody knows what this monster's name is. It's called the Nephilim, but that could be the fallen, that could be giants. We don't know. And it's my favorite monster because it causes really horrible things to happen to humanity. So can somebody read Genesis 6, 1 through 4? And then somebody else prepare the Numbers 13, and somebody else, like, they're there. So y'all find them.
When the people began to multiply on the face of the ground, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that they were fair, and they took wives for themselves of all that they chose. Then the Lord said, my spirit shall not abide in mortals forever, for they are flesh. Their days shall be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God went into the daughters of humans, who bore them. These were the heroes that were of old, warriors of renown.
Okay, Numbers 13, while Alaska finishes working.
I got it. So they brought to the Israelites an unfavorable report of the land that they had spied out, saying, the land that we have gone through as spies is a land that devours its inhabitants, and all the people that we saw in it are of great size. There we saw the Nephilim. The Anakites come from the Nephilim, and to ourselves we seemed like grasshoppers, and so we seemed to them.
Ezekiel.
I've got to go downstairs and get my Bible. So don't think that because I'm not jumping in, I'm not
No, it's fine. I just don't want
being
to do all the
participatory.
talking.
I got it.
Okay.
17 through 32. In the 20th year and the first month, on the 15th day of the month, the word of the Lord came to me. Mortal, wail over the hordes of Egypt and send them down with Egypt and the daughters of majestic nations to the world below with those who go down to the pit. Whom do you suppress? Whom do you surpass in beauty? Go down, be laid to rest with the uncircumcised. They shall fall among those who are killed by the sword. Egypt has been handed over to the sword, carry away both it and its hordes. The mighty chiefs shall speak of them with their helpers out of the midst of Sheol. They have come down, they lie still, the uncircumcised, killed by the sword. Assyria is there, and all its company, their graves all around it, all of them killed, fallen by the sword. Their graves are set in the uttermost parts of the pit. Its company is all around its grave, all of them killed, fallen by the sword, who spread terror in the land of the living. Elam is there, and all of its hordes around its grave, all of them killed, fallen by the sword, who went down uncircumcised into the world below, who spread terror in the land of the living. They bear their shame with those who go down to the pit. They have made Elam a bed among the slain with all its hordes, their graves all around them, all of them uncircumcised, killed by the sword. For terror of them was spread in the land of the living, and they bear their shame with those who go down to the pit. They are placed among the slain. What is that word? Mesh, is that right? And Tubal are there, and all their multitude, their graves all around them, all of them uncircumcised, killed by the sword. For they spread terror in the land of the living, and they do not lie with the fallen warriors of long ago who went down to Sheol with their weapons of war, whose swords were laid under their heads and whose shields are upon their bones. For the terror of the warriors was in the land of the living. So you shall be broken and lie among the uncircumcised with those who are killed by the sword. Edom is there, its kings and all its princes, who for all their might are laid with those who are killed by the sword. They lie with the uncircumcised, with those who go down to the pit. The princes of the north are there, all of them, and all the Sidonians, whatever, who have gone down in shame with the slain for all their terror that they cause by their might. They lie uncircumcised with those who are killed by the sword and bear their shame with those who go down to the pit. When Pharaoh sees them, he will be consoled for all his hordes. Pharaoh and all his army killed by the sword, says the Lord God. For he spread terror in the land of the living. Therefore, he shall be laid to rest among the uncircumcised with those who are slain by the sword. Pharaoh, all his multitude, says the Lord God.
Okay, and then quickly, 2 Peter, and Jude basically says the same thing as Ezekiel. So does anybody have 2 Peter 2 and 4?
Peter 2 and 4 says, for if God did not spare angels when they sinned, but sent them to hell, putting them in chains of darkness to be held for judgment.
So all of these passages have at some point in them this word Nephilim that nobody really knows how it's translated, because nobody can agree on the root of the word, right? So it's either giants, it's either the fallen ones, it's either angels. We don't know how to translate son of God, but these were these huge, scary creatures that interacted with human beings, perished with human beings, perished at the hands of human beings, and we don't know how they relate to the Philistines either. So the first monster mentioned in the Bible causes the flood, right? And so that's how we begin to understand the relationship between humanity and monsters in the Bible. Is we begin with the Nephilim, and we have the description of them. They're sons of God. They're huge. They're also bad. This was before circumcision, and so these are these guys. So I want to go on to the next one because I think the next one has a fun activity that I'm not going to participate in. So there's another group of monsters. I want somebody to pick B and then 3 other people to pick the L, I guess. I just don't want the same person to read B as I want to read the L's. So there's 2 other kinds of monsters in wisdom that are described in great detail. And what I want y'all to do is to draw the monsters as the person reads them. So who's going to read the B monster? Job 40:15-24.
I can, I guess.
Huh?
I said I can.
Okay. So y'all draw what she reads. So Irene reads slow so they can draw it.
Okay.
Y'all got pencil and paper because it's Bible study, right?
Yeah, I got pencil and paper. I just don't have my Bible, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
So draw as she reads.
Okay. To 24. Okay. Look at Behemoth, which I made just as I made you. It eats grass like an ox. Its strength is in its loins, and its power in the muscles of its belly. It makes its tail stiff like a cedar. The sinews of its thighs are knit together. Its bones are tubes of bronze. Its limbs are bars of iron. Give them a minute to let them draw.
Yeah, because I'm trying to draw that too. Okay, and I can't draw. That's my caveat. So we don't have a full description of what the behemoth looks like. But we can tell that it eats grass, right? And it's got some really strong body parts. And its strength is in its loins. So it's got
Strong body, muscles.
It's got a lot of strong stomach, strong body, strong testicles. Strength is in its loins. So this is my drawing of the behemoth. And y'all can't see it because the computer ain't working, but let me see if I can turn my background off so y'all can see my drawing. This is my drawing of my behemoth because I can't draw.
That looks like that dead lion last year.
So what did you guys get for the behemoth?
Mine looks similar to yours, but now when I look at it, it's like I think I drew a sheep. Yeah. And that wasn't meant to be that way, but it has this like huge body that suggests strength and a head that's gobbling up, some grass or whatever. It's got 3 legs. I don't know why 3.
Todd, what is yours?
Yeah. I started to think of like a triceratops, like pictures that I've seen, because I've never thought of this before, but they say the tail's like a cedar, and the cedar has branches sticking out.
Right.
I always think of like a pole, like a cedar that strips, but when they said like a pole instead of a cedar, so maybe it has thorns on it.
So how big would this creature be to be able to make its tail as straight as a cedar? Like, what does this animal look like?
No.
Anybody else want to share their picture? Danita, it can't be worse than mine. Vanessa?
Here's mine. I actually wanted to draw a cow, but that didn't happen. But it's like a cyclops, so it does have a little eye, like a cyclops. I tried to draw a tail, but yeah. I went to draw something like a cow since it eats grass, but yeah, that didn't happen.
Okay, so none of us are artists, and that's really cool. So I'm gonna reshare my screen. So that's go ahead, Danita.
I don't feel bad then.
Yeah.
You got
Oh.
a smiling.
What was that? Show that again. Could you show that again?
You gotta get closer. Look at it. It's strong in the belly. I like that.
Yeah.
And she's got the parts labeled. That's awesome, Zanita. Okay, so we're gonna read the rest of the monster and the wisdom. So does anybody want to read Job? Because I'm gonna say now, if you read it, you're exempt from drawing it. So does anybody want to read Job 41, 1 through 34?
Want me to finish? I haven't finished.
Oh, you didn't finish?
Oh, I stopped and let everybody draw.
Okay, no. Go ahead and finish.
It is the first of the great acts of God. Only its maker can approach it with the sword. For the mountains yield food for it, where all the wild animals play. Under the lotus plants it lies, in the covert of its reeds and in the marsh. The lotus trees cover it for shade. The willows of the Wadi surround it. Even if the river is turbulent, it is not frightened. It is confident through Jordan rushes against its mouth. Can one take it with hooks or pieces in its nose with a snare?
Yeah. Does that help your drawing? So it's because to me the lotus plants covering it means it's tiny, so it's like strong and little all at the same time. I don't understand what this monster looks like. And that's part of it existing in the interstitial spaces, right? In the liminal spaces of between something that might be real, but kind of difficult to describe. Anybody want to read Job 41 so that they can be exempt from drawing? Go ahead, Danita.
41,
1 through
1 through
34.
34. Can you pull the Leviathan with a fish hook or tie down its tongue with a rope? 2. Can you put a cord through its nose or pierce its jaw with a hook? 3. Will it keep begging you for mercy? Will it speak to you with gentle words? 4. Will it make an agreement with you for you to take it as your slave for life? 5. Can you make a pet of it like a bird or put it on a leash for the young women in your house? 6. Will traders barter for it? Will they divide it up among the merchants? 7. Can you fill its hide with harpoons or its head with fishing spears? 8. If you lay a hand on it, will you remember the struggle and never do it again? 9. Any hope of subduing it is false. The mere sight of it is overpowering. 10. No one is fierce enough to rouse it. Who then is able to stand against me? 11. Who has a claim against me that I must pay? Everything under heaven belongs to me. 12. I will not fail to speak of Leviathan's limbs, its strength, and its graceful form. 13. Who can strip off its outer coat? Who can penetrate its double coat of armor? 14. Who dares open the doors of its mouth, ringed about with fearsome teeth? 15. Its back has rows of shields tightly sealed together. 16. Each is so close to the next that no air can pass between. 17. They are joined fast to one another. They cling together and cannot be parted. 18. Its snorting throws out flashes of light. Its eyes are like the rays of dawn. 19. Flames stream from its mouth. Sparks of fire shoot out. 20. Smoke pours from its nostrils as from a boiling pot over burning reeds. 21. Its breath sets coals ablaze, and flames dart from its mouth. 22. Strength resides in its neck, dismay goes before it. 23. The folds of its flesh are tightly joined, they are firm and immovable. 24. Its chest is hard as rock, hard as a lower millstone. 25. When it rises up, the mighty are terrified. They retreat before its thrashing. 26. The sword that reaches it has no effect, nor does the spear or the dart or the javelin. 27. Iron it treats like straw, and bronze like rotten wood. 28. Arrows do not make it flee. Sling stones are like chaff to it. 29. A club seems to it be but a piece of straw. It laughs at the rattling of the lance. 30. Its undersides are jagged, potsherds, leaving a trail in the mud like a thrashing slave. 31. It makes the depths churn like a boiling cauldron and stirs up the sea like a pot of ointment. 32. It leaves a glistening weight behind it. One would think the deep had white hair. 33. Nothing on earth is its equal, a creator without fear. 34. It looks down on all that are haughty. It is king over all that are proud. That ends the reading.
Okay, I'm not going to let y'all share it yet because we got to do Psalm 74, 13 through 14, because it gives just a little bit more description of what this monster looks like.
I'll do Psalm 74, 13 through 14.
Okay.
Reads as follows. You divided the sea by your might. You broke the heads of the dragons in the water. You crushed the heads of the Leviathan. You gave him as food for the creatures of the wilderness.
Okay, and then Isaiah 27, 1.
In that day, the Lord will punish with his sword, his fierce, great, and powerful sword. Leviathan, the gliding serpent, Leviathan, the coiling serpent. He will slay the monster of the sea.
Okay, so the Leviathan, this is a full description of the Leviathan in the Bible. I'm going to show my drawing based on these three texts, and y'all can't laugh. Okay. And then we're going to talk about what the purpose of these two monsters are in this text. Y'all see that? Because it's got two heads, and that's fire coming out of it. And there's smoke, and it's got some hair, but it's like coiled, but it's got legs so that it can raise up. That's what I think it looks like. I also can't draw. What y'all got?
I didn't hear nothing about two heads, but all right.
That was the Isaiah passage. It's our heads.
Can you see that?
You got to hold it closer.
Let me turn off my background.
We try not to show y'all our houses and can't show y'all our pictures.
Right? See that?
Oh, yours looks like a horse.
Oh, that's good, huh?
What's that on the top? Is there another face?
Yeah, I put if it was spheres like that, I put some kind of scales or horns or
Ah,
something up there.
okay, that's really cool.
That's good.
Anybody else want to share theirs?
Mine's a sea creature. So, but that's a sea creature, and the tongue part caught me, so I made sure that it has a tongue sticking out.
Okay. I like that. Tiffany, you want to share yours? Okay, that works. Anybody else want to share theirs? Oh wow, she actually did draw one. Okay. Todd, you got one? You're on mute. Okay. I'm going to take it that means no. Okay. So, the purpose of this, if you remember, that both of these critters were originally described in Job, right? And what God was doing. Oh, Todd, you want to share it?
Oh, no, I'm sorry.
Oh.
I was putting my monster to bed. He was making me very angry. So I don't know who was the monster, him or me.
That's a good question. So part of what God is doing here with Job is reminding Job that he doesn't have enough power to control the world, right? Like he's putting Job in his place. And that's how these monsters function, to remind us that the God who created us also created bigger than us. And so we need to remember that we are not them. That the monsters keep us humble. And human. We can't do what God does, because God can control these monsters. God can take care of these monsters that we would shiver and fright and die just from seeing them. Now, keep in mind that these monsters don't function like the monsters in our typical horror movies, right? These monsters are scary, but they're not given evil. They're not assigned evil. They just make everybody afraid because they are so scary, because they're so frightening, because they have all of this skin and fire comes out of their mouths and all of this detail that they give them. They are frightening, but they are not in and of themselves evil. That's not the cultural function of the monsters so far in the Bible. They are just these things that say, okay, here is a line of where humans can go. Humans can do this much and no more. And the monsters set that line. Okay? Okay, any questions, Mike? You're noting stuff.
No, I'm just mentally noting. No. I like this.
Okay, so I don't want y'all to draw no more monsters because I want y'all to actually participate. But I do want you to imagine them in your head as we read the next passages. And if for those of y'all who actually come to Bible study, y'all know that I have this thing about the way we talk about angels and the way angels are described in the Bible. So y'all can decide if these are angels or monsters. Does anybody want to read Ezekiel's vision? And does anybody else want to read Isaiah's?
I'll read, let me find it. I'll read Ezekiel. Just give me a quick second here.
Okay, anybody got Isaiah's?
Okay. I think I have Ezekiel 4 through 27. Right?
And imagine it in your mind as he reads it.
As I looked, a stormy wind came out of the north, a great cloud with brightness around it, and fire flashing forth continually. And in the middle of the fire, something gleaming amber. And in the middle of it was something like 4 living creatures. This was their appearance. They were all of human form. Each had 4 faces, and each of them had 4 wings. The legs were straight, and the soles of the feet were like the sole of a calf's foot, and they sparkled like burnished bronze. Under the wings, on their four sides, they had human hands, and the four had their faces and the wings thus. The hands touched one another. Each of them moved straight ahead without turning as they moved. As for the appearance of their faces, the four had the face of a human being, the face of a lion on the right side, the face of an ox on the left side, and the face of an eagle. Such were their faces. Their wings were spread out above. Each creature had two wings, each of which touched the wing of another, while two covered their bodies. Each moved straight ahead. Wherever the spirit would go, they went, without turning as they went. In the middle of the living creatures, there was something that looked like burning coals of fire, like torches moving to and fro among the living creatures. The fire was bright, and the lightning issued from the fire. The living creatures darted to and fro like a flash of lightning. As I looked at the living creatures, I saw a wheel on the earth beside the living creatures, one for each of the four of them. As for the appearance of the wheels and their construction, their appearance was like the gleaming of beryl, and the four had the same form, the construction being something like a wheel within a wheel. When they moved in any of four directions without veering as they moved. The rims were tall and awesome, for the rims of all four were full of eyes all around. When the living creatures moved, the wheels moved beside them. When the living creatures rose from the earth, the wheels rose. Wherever the spirit would go, they went, and the wheels rose along with them. For the spirit of the living creatures was in the wheels. When they moved, the others moved. When they stopped, the others stopped. And when they rose from the earth, the wheels rose along with them. For the spirit of the living creatures was in the wheels. Over the heads of the living creatures, there was something like a dome, shining like crystal, spread out above their heads. Under the dome, their wings were stretched out straight, one toward another, and each of the creatures had two wings covering its body. When they moved, I heard the sound of the wings like the sound of mighty waters, like the thunder of an Almighty, a sound of tumult, like the sound of an army. When they stopped, they let down their wings, and there came a voice from above the dome, over their heads. Where they stopped, they let down their wings, and above the dome, over their heads, there was something like a throne, and in appearance like sapphire, and seated above the likeness of a throne was something that seemed like a human form. Upward from what appeared like the loins, I saw something like gleaming amber, something that looked like a fire enclosed all around, and the downward from what looked like the loins, I saw something that looked like fire, and there was a splendor all around.
Okay, so that's three different monsters. Did y'all catch all three? The creepiest one in the world to me is the wheels, because I don't like eyes, and it's got eyes all around. Okay? And we focus on the angels, the first monster. We focus on that because it's got all of these moving and shifting parts. But did y'all catch the fire coming out of the crotch of the human form? From what appeared as the loins, above it shot out fire, something that looked like fire. And from below it shot out fire, something that looked like fire. Did y'all catch that? Did y'all picture that in your head? Okay. Somebody read Isaiah's.
In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord, high and exalted, seated on the throne, and the train of his robe filled the temple. Above him were seraphim, each with 6 wings. With 2 wings they covered their faces. With 2 they covered their feet. And with 2 they were flying. And they were calling to one another, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty. The whole earth is full of his glory. At the sound of their voices, the doorposts and thresholds shook. The temple was filled with smoke. Woe to me, I cried. I am ruined, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips. And my eyes have seen the King, the Lord Almighty. Then one of the seraphim flew to me with the live coal in his hand, which he had taken with tongs from the altar. With it, he touched my mouth and said, See, this has touched your lips. Your guilt is taken away and your sin atoned for. Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, Whom shall I send, and who will go for us? And I said, Here I am, send me.
Okay. So Isaiah's was a lot less detailed, right? Because somehow this seraph who had 6 wings also had a hand. And they had mouths that spoke like thunder but could also speak to the individual. So there's something else going on that Isaiah does not identify. But do you see the shift in the positioning of the monsters to the human being in this text, in these texts? Before, when we started with the Nephilim, they were giants who could cause human beings to do something. That was the way that monsters function. They were the others. They were just outside of the community, and they came into the community and caused havoc. And that's who monsters are. And so we could compare those monsters to the Egyptians. We could compare those monsters to any other usurpers because their function is to come inside and make us sin. And then we have the monsters, the behemoth and the Leviathan, who are just there to keep us in our place, right? To remind us that we're human. But these monsters or angels do something different. What do? How do they function? Y'all are quiet. Okay, so let me say.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Don't they do whatever God instructs?
They do what God says.
Yeah.
These monsters function as emissaries of the divine.
Right,
and so
right.
Here for the first time, we have monsters that are definitely on one side of good or evil. These monsters are definitely good. They are God's monsters sent us, which is why it's, or angels, right? Because these are the ones that say you are called to do what God bids. They speak for God and to God at the same time. So they're still the go-between. They're not divine. They're not human. And they are terrifying. They're not cute, cherub, cuddly. These are terrifying entities that cause intense emotions at the same time as a willingness to serve God. Right? But they're not normal. And so part of what this function of the monsters here in this part of the text is to push us into being closer to God, right? The other monsters separated us, made sure we knew where we were. These monsters say, no, you can get close to God. Let's keep going. Y'all see why I'm excited about this? Something shifts. Something shifts between the prophetic monsters and the monsters in the New Testament. And I don't want all y'all, like all of these texts don't have to be read, but like if you see something that you want to read, something short that you might want to read, pick it and read it. But something shifts. The monsters become a different type of monster.
Yeah. So I'm going to read Matthew 8, 28 to 33. So it reads like this. 28 to 33. So, let me go down to 28 to 33 would be good, right? So that's, right. When he came to the other side, to the country of the Gadarenes, the two demoniacs coming out of the tomb met him. They were so fierce that no one could pass that way. Suddenly they shouted, "What have you to do with us, Son of God? Have you come this morning to torment us before the time?" Now a large herd of swine was feeding at some distance from them. The demons begged him, "If you cast us out, send us into the herd of swine." And he said to them, "Go." So they came out and entered the swine, and suddenly the whole herd rushed down the steep bank into the sea and perished into the water. Swineherds ran off, and on going into the town, they told the whole story about what had happened to the demoniacs.
Okay, somebody want to read another one? Like if you're scrolling through and you're looking for which one, pick the Beelzebub. We ain't got to read them all, but I really want to pick that one. Anybody?
Hang on. Or 21, 28. They went to Capernaum, and when the Sabbath came, he entered the synagogue and taught. They were astounded at his teachings, for he taught them as one having authority and not as the scribes. Just then there was in their synagogue a man with an unclean spirit, and he cried out, "What have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." But Jesus rebuked them, saying, "Be silent and come out of him." And the unclean spirit, convulsing him and crying with a loud voice, came out of him. They were all amazed, and they kept asking one another, "What is this? A new teaching with authority? He commands even the unclean spirits, and they obey him." At once his fame began to spread throughout the surrounding region of Galilee.
Okay, somebody find Beelzebub. Maybe the Luke one. I think it's 11.
Which one?
I think it's Luke 11.
Oh.
No. Yes, it's Luke 11, 14 through 23. Somebody want to read that one?
I can. Now he was casting out a demon that was mute. When the demon had gone out, and one who had been mute spoke, and the crowds were amazed. But some of them said, "He cast out demons by Beelzebub, the ruler of the demons." Others, to test him, kept demanding from him a sign from heaven. But he knew what they were thinking and said to them, every kingdom divided against itself becomes a desert, and house falls on house. If Satan also is divided against himself, how will his kingdom stand? For you say that I cast out the demons by Beelzebub. But if I cast out the demons by Beelzebub, by whom do you exorcists cast them out? Therefore, they will be your judges. But if it is by the finger of God that I cast out demons, then the kingdom of God has come to you.
Okay, so do y'all see that shift? We started with the monsters of the Bible. They were the Nephilim. They were the sons of God. They were something great, awesome, and mighty, but that was separate from human beings, that came into human beings and caused the flood, right? But they were still related to God. And then we had the Leviathan and the Behemoth, who were also creations of God that only God could control, right? And everybody else was scared to death of them. But God could control them, and that's how you know that God is God. And then we had the really scary, frightening creatures that made people do what God said do. But they still came from God, and they functioned as in the in-between between God and humanity. Who do we have now? What are the monsters here in the New Testament?
It seems to me that the monsters here are, I'm going to say, spirits or evil that can take up residence inside of human bodies.
We have, yes.
Yeah, and they're opponents. They're a funny kind of an opponent, right? So they are antagonists or they're opponents to God, but it's the same time they recognize the imbalance of power. Oh, who has the power? So
we have a radical culture shift.
Yeah.
Before, monsters were tangible entities that could touch, that could speak, that you could feel the wind, that could eat and devour, that could actually have sex with women and create other human beings. These were the monsters before. And now we have evil spirits and demons and the rulers of demons. That's new.
Mm.
That's not found in the Old Testament. In the Old Testament, when, as with Saul, right? If, in 1 Samuel, when Saul decided that he was going to try to be God, or whatever Saul did to make God mad, and Saul turned evil, the evil spirit that came on Saul came from God. And everybody recognized, oh, you've got an evil spirit from the Lord. Right? But here, these ain't that.
Yeah.
We got some new demons, some new monsters on the block. Why do y'all think? What do you think happened in the culture? What is the cultural shift between the prophets and the New Testament?
Roman Empire.
The Roman Empire. What else? Because they had been under subjugation before. Like in the prophets, they had been Babylonian Empire, Persian Empire. This was not their first experience with the empire. But what happened?
This shift in the idea of what gods were and how they interacted with humanity, that they were somehow can move around unseen or appear into something else.
But they had possession before because Baal did that, right? And so that's not new. And they had other deities around them all the time, which is why they needed prophets. So what happened? What shifted?
God is with us on the earth. Did that change something? God physically being present in Jesus?
Not yet in the cultural imagination because they weren't there.
They weren't there yet.
So again, monsters function within culture, right? They tell something about what the culture is going through. And the shift, they couldn't save themselves. They couldn't fight enough wars. They weren't hearing from God about what to do. They had the Maccabean revolution and it failed. Nothing they did could shake off Rome. They were hopeless. Helpless. And so they saw monsters everywhere. Everywhere. And things that didn't make sense. And one of these passages is about the boy who was possessed and had epilepsy. And he was having seizures.
Yeah.
And they conflated the seizures with a demon. Y'all remember that text, right? It's in one of them. So let's talk about why that wouldn't have happened. This is 1st century AD, right? When Jesus is doing his ministry. This is post Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar, who was epileptic and who had an epileptic line. So epilepsy was not unknown to the cultural imagination. They would not have saw, especially the Lucan passage, which I think is 8. They would not have seen an epileptic as a doctor and said, oh, this is a demon. That would not have been part of the cultural imagination. But for them to be in such a place where every sickness, everything that they see, everything that they can imagine has to be coming from an evil source because evil is all around them and there's nothing they can do. They're that powerless that they are creating monsters and imagining that the people around them are carrying monsters. So much so that if you cast a monster out, if you help somebody, you must come from the monster itself. What does that say about where they understand God to be?
Absent.
Not as far off.
If I can't help you without being from the monster that made you the way you are, we so hopeless and helpless, we can't even imagine God can help us.
Right.
Wow, that's really interesting, right? Because in the what was it? What text did I read? Matthew? Yeah. So in the Matthew text, later on, it ends with them, at least most immediately, telling Jesus, if I remember correctly, to book up, to get out.
You can't stay
anymore. To get out of the neighborhood. You need to raise up and leave. Very interesting.
Okay, and so then something else happens. At the same time that they're seeing monsters in people, and we ain't gonna finish by 7, I'm sorry. At the same time they're seeing monsters within people, there are monsters all around. And I want y'all to see the difference, though, before I do this, before I ask y'all to read. Look at where these texts are. All of them are Matthew, all of them are Mark, all of them are Luke. There is no demon healing in John. None. No possession. None of that is in John. And one day we'll talk about why. But I want to point to the monsters wandering around because they're not all demons. There's monsters wandering around, and some of this is Jesus' fault.
Wow.
So Matthew 27, 52 and 53, which is my favorite text of the Bible, because most people just skip right over it like it's not there. And especially John 11. But please, if you want to read something else, please feel free to do it. Oh, and Matthew 14, 1 through 2. Like, pick at least those two, but if you want to read something, pick it.
Okay, I'll read Matthew 27, 52, 53. Is that what you said?
Yep.
Okay. All right. 52 to 53. Yeah. The tombs were also open, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. After his resurrection, they came out of the tombs, entered the holy city, and appeared to many.
So that text, when Jesus died, all the dead people woke up. And they just hung out. And then when Jesus is raised, they came out of the tombs, these folk who had been dead, and they wandered around Jerusalem. And Matthew 14, 1 through 12 is the story of John the Baptist's beheading. He was one of the saints. Like, he was Jesus's cousin. He would have been one of the ones who was wandering around Jerusalem, raised from the dead, with his head under his arm. Somebody read something else. Somebody read the John passage. Anybody?
Hang on. 28, 44.
Mm-hmm.
Is anybody else dying to read? Okay.
I can read it. Do you want me to?
Go
I
ahead.
finally got there. 28 through 44. When she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary and told her privately, "The teacher is here and is calling for you." And when she heard it, she got up and quickly went to him. Now Jesus had not yet come to the village, but he was still at the place where Martha had met him. The Jews who were with her in the house, consoling her, saw Mary get up quickly and go out. They followed her because they thought that she was going to the tomb to weep there. When Mary came to where Jesus was and saw him, she knelt at his feet and said to him, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping, the Jews who came with her were also weeping. He was greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. He said, "Where have you laid him?" They said to him, "Lord, come and see." Jesus began to weep. So the Jews said, "See how he loved him?" But some of them said, "Could not he who opened up the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying?" Then Jesus, again greatly disturbed, came to the tomb. There was a cave, and a stone was lying against it. Jesus says, "Take away the stone." Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, "Lord, there is a stench because he has been dead for 4 days." Jesus said to her, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone, and Jesus looked upward and said, "Father, I thank you for having heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I have said this for the sake of the crowd standing here, so that they may believe that you sent me." When he had said this, he cried out with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The dead man came out, his hands and feet bound with strips of cloth, and his face wrapped in a cloth. Jesus said to them, "Unbind him and let him go."
Okay, so with our hermeneutics suspended, so this ain't a miracle, Jesus just made a zombie.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So we have zombies at his resurrection, zombies at his call and beck and call. This is what is happening. And I want to read Luke 11:24 through 26 before I explain the cultural imagination, why the resurrection of the body creating monsters drove people crazy. Because the rest of that passage in John, the people wanted to kill Lazarus. You're supposed to be dead. This was not acceptable to them. These people who believed in the bodily resurrection could not tolerate Lazarus being alive. He was a monster to them. Okay? So it wasn't a miracle to them. This was not acceptable. Okay, so Luke 11. When the unclean spirit has gone out of a person, it wanders through waterless regions looking for a resting place. But not finding any, it says, I will return to my house from which I came. When it comes, it finds it swept and put in order. Then it goes and brings 7 other spirits more evil than itself, and they enter and live there. And the last state of that person is worse than the first. Jesus says that. The same Jesus who's casting out spirits to just wander around. So when I say Jesus, some of this is Jesus's fault. Like this is what Jesus is doing. And the people who are watching this, what we're saying is, oh, look at the miracle, look at the miracle, look at how God is operating within their presence. The people who are watching this are not saying the same thing. They're panicking because Jesus is creating monsters in their midst. There's zombies, there's evil spirits wandering around looking for somebody to rest on. And there are no water. I mean, we are in the desert here, so that's us. We can get possessed. Like, what is he doing? He is putting us in danger. And this is in the midst of the cultural imagination, again, where they felt like they had no salvation. They felt like they had no peace. And now he's creating monsters in the midst of this and pissing off Rome at the same time. What are we supposed to do? What does that say about the culture that they lived in? The Jewish culture. Now, because he was with Jews. He wasn't in Rome. He wasn't dealing with the cultural imagination of Rome. But the Jewish culture, what does it say about the Jewish culture and the ways that it had changed over the years?
Wow.
And how they understood Jesus. We can point to Jesus.
They say that they appear to have, I don't know, lost their understanding of the supernatural power of God, like they once believed would happen all the time, and now like God didn't have any control over dead.
So we have God is absent, and we're powerless and helpless and hopeless. And all the things that God created, God no longer has control over them, but there is something that God did not create. The creator of all things has something that is outside of God. And that is new. Usually with monsters, it's something between God and humanity, but God is still in control of it, right? Something between the divine and the human. God made it. But this monster that was created in this cultural imagination is something that is bigger than God. Because God has shrunk so far in their understanding of who God is. For them, God had become powerless and inert. And the monsters were large. They loomed large. They were everywhere. They had more power. And even the things that we see God do, we don't believe it's God. Because we can't understand it. Does that make sense? Okay, so now let's continue. I put this here because it's another example of how Jesus really confused them people. It's when Jesus says, no, my blood is the true drink. Like, if you're thirsty, you really got to drink my blood. And you really got to eat my flesh. And the people were like, okay, so this man wants us to eat his body. But I said I wasn't going to pick on Jesus. So I'm not going to pick on Jesus.
Yeah.
Okay, so we can't talk about monsters in the Bible without talking about Revelation, because Revelation has the world's most monsters. Like it's the best horror book ever written, right? And the best types of monsters. But I also want to contrast all the monsters in Revelation with the monsters in Daniel. So I need 3 people to pick a line. And read, like, if you're going to do Revelation 4, 6, 6b through 8 and 5 6 do Daniel 7 2 through 8. Does that make sense?
Or the
So we can hear the monsters together.
okay. So 4 6b.
Danita, you want to read? Vanessa? I'm going to call on people.
I have my phone, and so I can do one, and then maybe someone else can do the other one on that line.
Okay, how about you do Revelation 5 6?
Okay.
And I'll do 4 6b and through 8a. Okay. So around the throne, on each side of the throne, are 4 living creatures, full of eyes in front and behind. The first living creature like a lion, the second living creature like an ox, the third living creature with a face like a human face, and the fourth living creature like a flying eagle. And the 4 living creatures, each of them with 6 wings, are full of eyes all around and inside. And day and night without ceasing they sing, Holy, 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 the Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come.
Ready for Revelation 6?
Revelation chapter 5, verse 6.
Chapter 5, verse 6. And I beheld, and lo, in the midst of the throne and of the 4 beasts, and in the midst of the elders stood a lamb as it had been slain, having 7 horns and 7 eyes, which are the 7 spirits of God sent forth into all the earth.
Okay. And then I'm going to read Daniel 7, 2 through 8. I, Daniel, saw in my vision by the night the 4 winds of heaven stirring up the great sea, and 4 great beasts came up out of the sea, different from one another. The first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. Then as I watched, its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up from the ground and made to stand on 2 feet like a human being, and a human mind was given to it. Another beast appeared, a second one that looked like a bear. It was raised up on one side and had 3 tusks in its mouth, among its teeth, and was told, Arise, devour many bodies. After this, as I watched, another appeared like a leopard. The beast had 4 wings of a bird on its back and 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. After this, I saw in the visions by night a 4th beast, terrifying and dreadful, exceedingly strong. It had great iron teeth and was devouring, breaking into pieces and stamping what was left with its feet. It was different from all the beasts that preceded it. It had 10 horns. I was considering those horns when another horn appeared, a little one, coming up among them. To make room for it, 3 of the earlier horns were plucked up from the root, and there were eyes, like human eyes, on this horn, and a mouth speaking arrogantly. Somebody got Revelation 6 and Daniel 8.
Revelation 6, 1 through 8.
Mm-hmm.
I watched as the Lamb opened the first of the 7 seals. Then I heard one of the 4 living creatures say in a voice like thunder, Come. I looked, and there before me was a white horse. Its rider held a bow, and he was given a crown, and he rode out as a conqueror bent on conquest. When the Lamb opened the 2nd seal, I heard the 2nd living creature say, Come. Then another horse came out, a fiery red one. Its rider was given power to take peace from the earth and to make people kill each other. To him was given a large sword. When the Lamb opened the 3rd seal, I heard the 3rd living creature say, Come. I looked, and there before me was a black horse. Its rider was holding a pair of scales in his hand. Then I heard what sounded like a voice among the 4 living creatures saying, 2 pounds of wheat for a day's wages, and 6 pounds of barley for a day's wages, and do not damage the oil and the wine. When the Lamb opened the fourth seal, I heard the voice of the fourth living creature say, "Come." I looked, and there beneath me was a pale horse. Its rider was named Death, and Hades was following close behind him. They were given power over a fourth of the earth to kill by sword, famine, and plague, and by the wild beasts of the earth. Daniel. Okay. In my vision, I saw myself in the citadel of Susa in the province of Elam. In the vision, I was beside the Uli Canal. I looked up, and there before me was a ram with two horns, standing beside the canal. On the horns were long. One of the horns was longer than the other, but grew up later. I watched the ram as it charged toward the west and the north and the south. No animal could stand against it, and none could rescue from its power. It did as it pleased and became great. As I was thinking about this, suddenly a goat with a prominent horn between its eyes came from the west, crossing the whole earth without touching the ground. It came toward the two-horned ram I had seen standing beside the canal and charged at it in great range. I saw it attack the ram furiously, striking the ram and shattering its two horns. The ram was powerless to stand against it. The goat knocked it to the ground and trampled on it, and none could rescue the ram from its power. The goat became very great, but at the height of its power, the large horn was broken off, and in its place, four prominent horns grew up toward the four winds of heaven. Out of one of them came another horn, which started small, but grew in power to the south and to the east and toward the beautiful land. It grew until it reached the host of the heavens, and it threw some of the starry hosts down to the earth and trampled on them.
Okay, Vanessa, you read 8:2-10.
Yeah.
Okay, so can somebody read the Daniel 10:5-7?
Daniel 10:5-7.
Mm-hmm.
I looked up and saw a man clothed in linen with a belt of gold from Upaz in his waist, around his waist. His body was like arrow, and his face like lightning, his eyes like flaming torches, his arms and legs like the gleam of burnished bronze, and the sounds of his words like the roar of a multitude. I, Daniel, alone saw the vision. The people who were with me did not see the vision, though a great trembling fell upon them, and they fled and hid themselves.
Okay. So it's like 7:13. So I'm gonna skip 12-13. That's a description of the beast. But I want to talk about what's going on here and why now we all of a sudden have some very clear descriptions of really scary beasts and monsters, and how it functions within the future imagination of these two separate cultures and why they sound so much alike. How do I want to do this? Can y'all tell me what John and Daniel have in common, beside the fact that they had visions that sound just alike? What do they have in common?
Were they isolated when they had these visions?
They were in exile. What else? What was going on around them? What was the culture in which they saw these monsters?
Weren't they both under great powers? Was it the Babylonian king, then the Roman Empire?
What was going on? Somebody other than Irene.
Fine.
What was going on with Babylon and Rome?
They were occupying right? The Jews were occupied their territory, and they were under oppression by empire.
They were under oppression by empire. What else? Oh, come on, y'all. Okay, so these are called apocalyptic texts, right? These imaginations of what the end time will look like. Why is it called the end time? Is because this is what we think will happen at the end of time. Why is it called the end time? And the answers to those two questions are the same.
Did they believe it was the end time?
What was ending?
The way human life on earth, the way we live.
That they had no hope.
The end of human life on earth and the way we live, are those two things synonymous?
See, I don't think they're necessarily synonymous. And I think what is being foretold here by the monsters is the end of the way we currently live, the ending of something old, and the opening of the door, even though it's not fully painted out, that leads to something new.
So it's the end of empire. It's a radical shift in the way we live. So if we think about when some of the greatest monsters came up in U.S. culture, the late 1800s, early 1900s, right? The late 1970s, early 1980s. These were periods in our culture where we could imagine the world really ending, right?
Yeah.
World War I. This is something new. We've never had a war like this before. The world could end. In the middle of the Cold War, the world could end. At the end of the Cold War, we have no idea what's going on. The world could end. Our culture is radically shifting. And in the midst of that, we create new monsters. Because we don't understand what's going on with human beings. The things that we hold on to that give us comfort, for this is how humans act. This is how God acts. We need God to act in a different way. That small God that we put in a box, we need God to be a whole lot bigger than that. And to come in huge demonstrative ways and take over, because we've really screwed it up and the world is ending because of us. And so these texts are not so much future casting, but they're foreseeable future. What we can imagine, what we can think of, we need God to do something giant. And so we have monsters that show just how big the problem is. Ridiculously scary monsters like red beasts with dragon tails that may or may not be the Leviathan, but not have the same word in the Hebrew. Because we need that. We need to see God defeat that. I promise I'm going to wrap up. Because we at Revelation ain't nowhere else to go. I promise. So, monsters in the 21st century Christian imagination. Who are the monsters that we have today? Who are the monsters that we've created for ourselves? Like, the reason that this monster seminary happened is because of the movie whose name I will not say, just in case I accidentally say it 5 times or think it 5 times. I'm trying to say it. I'm not saying it.
Enemy.
No.
You gotta say it more than once. You're all right, Reverend Irene. You only said it once. Like,
We don't do that here. No. We don't.
Yeah.
So, but who are the monsters that we've created? Like, if we think about the movies that have come out, the picture. I can't see that, Todd. I'm gonna stop sharing so I can see Todd's phone.
This picture is. Can you see it?
Oh wow.
That's a whole different kind of monster. And
Yeah.
that
Right. It's interesting because I see. I mean, I could imagine this coming up with this monster image myself, but these are images that are from
hero.
Yeah.
And there's a line between hero and monster with the Nephilim especially. Who are some of the monsters that we have? Who are some of the villains that we have? Name a villain from a recent movie or show or like a monster. Other than the one that we ain't saying. Thanos. What type of monster was Thanos? Were his motives clearly defined as monsters?
I mean, it's an interesting monster because he wants what's good, but his means to get to what's good are evil.
He's not a clearly defined monster, right? Who else?
But a common one is Dracula.
Okay, 21st century though. He was created in another era. So 21st century monsters. What are we coming up with? Our culture in this moment.
These monsters stuck in this culture. But okay.
I think it's some Stephen King characters like the Walking Dude and The Stand, and the Pennywise the Clown.
A Killmonger.
Yeah.
Jason, Freddy Krueger.
Oh man, his name is slipping my mind. And it shouldn't be. I'm embarrassed. But because he was one of my favorites in the way he functions as a monster. Some Tales from the Hood.
The black guy.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. The funeral director.
Yes, the funeral home director.
Yeah.
What else? Who are our monsters? And we're struggling to think about it because all of our horror movies, the monsters are human.
Godzilla.
We've got Godzilla, and that's another culture, and their monsters came out of the atomic bomb. So like, that's and what that did to them. So,
well, we have that like the axis of evil that and stuff like that. I mean, I think culturally we come up with enemies of America of who we are.
So we create monsters that are human, that aren't clearly defined as good or evil. They're kind of ambiguous. And I forgot to mention that by the time we get to Revelation and Daniel, all the monsters are definitely evil, right? So we've got this trajectory, and our monsters are evil but good, good but evil, and human. They look like us. We can see ourselves in them. We can sympathize with them. Frankly, I thought Thanos had a really good idea. Like, we absolutely need to redistribute the resources. Absolutely. Not by killing half of the galactical population. There's got to be another way to do that. What does that mean about what we think about God? And what we think about ourselves? What are we creating monsters for?
We don't believe God can save us, or we don't believe in God, period. That we are our own God, that we are superior. We can save ourselves.
What else?
You know, I think what Reverend Prince mentioned is one thing. I think there's multiple reasons why we devise monsters. And I think in addition to what Reverend Prince just said, I think sometimes we create monsters to help us make sense of what's going on. And so that even though our culture is different than, the biblical times, in a lot of ways, there's some similarities, right? But we find ourselves despondent, over political reasons or whatever, and we just can't quite make sense of it, and we imagine monsters as one way of explaining it.
Well, that's how monsters are created in general. I'm thinking of how our culture has gone through all of the wars and gone through all of the philosophical changes that have included an overestimated sense of self, right? Like we have even Christian humanists that Jesus didn't really heal them. Jesus just said, get up, and he found something in himself to do it. So we have this overinflated sense of self, but we are still powerless, and we still sin, and we still can't get it right, and there's still evil in the world. How do we balance that with who we say God is? We create villains that aren't really villainous because it lets us off the hook. We create monsters that aren't really monstrous because it lets us off the hook. It helps us. Thank you, Dr. Carter, for staying as long as you did. This is a longer Bible study. It helps us to be able to wrestle with the monster in ourselves. It helps us to be able to excuse the parts of ourselves that we see as monstrous, and to forgive ourselves for thinking that we can do what God does. So our monsters function in the same way as everybody else's monsters, in between us and God. We don't use them to put God in God's place like they did in the 1st century AD. We use them to make sure that God don't ever come this way. That God don't ever judge us. That we can maintain our ego. At least that's what I think. Just looking at the trajectory of our culture. What do y'all think? Because I could be wrong. I could be wrong, Irene. She said that's my tragic flaw, that I don't think I'm wrong.
Yeah.
You didn't mention that she asked that question.
I did. What do y'all think?
I hear what you're saying, and I think that we monsterize people and create monsters to help explain or make sense of situations we find ourselves in, right? So that, since we're talking about the 20th century, certainly between 1970 and now, there's been so many economic changes, and people have lost jobs, there's financial crises, and what happens, I think, is some people, it's just crazy. And in order to make sense of it, we monsterize and we create monsters, right? So immigrants are monsters. It's a way of explaining the dire economic circumstance that some people find themselves in.
So what does it say about God?
Yeah.
Or who we believe God is in this era. And how we believe God functions in this era.
Yeah.
I'm legitimately asking. I will say that I was really disappointed as I read through the whole Bible looking for monsters that there were no examples of werewolves. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that werewolves came out of an era where we were killing wolves. We were so afraid of the possibility of a wolf eating our livestock as a culture, that we decimated wolf populations and created a monster that was part human, part wolf, to give us cause to decimate the wolves. so that we could pour our guilt onto the werewolf. That wasn't an issue in the Bible. The identity politics that we have now, where we're trying really hard to see ourselves as loved and worthy, and to see the differences that we have in between each other, and to value each other, creates monsters like in Jordan Peele's Us. But what does all of that say about God? And the role of Jesus. Like now I'm definitely pointing back to Jesus. What does it say about who God is for us and who God is with us in this era? About what we really believe. Like if we do Monster Seminary in another 100 years, what will we be dissecting?
You know, I don't want to overgeneralize.
Please do.
But I do think that in reference to God, there's a sense that people are struggling and wondering, where the hell is God? And how can you have this divine being who's supposedly all powerful and all loving and all that stuff that we talk about in the midst of all this calamity, you know? So I think that some of our monster creating, I think it has multiple sources, but I think one source might be just the sense that people have of despondency about where is God, or does God exist? Has God just kind of booked up and said, all right, you're all on your own?
I think it's the scripture that Ephesians 6, our struggle is not against enemies of blood and flesh, but against rulers, against authorities, and against cosmic powers of this present age. That, I was planning or thinking about this coming up, that was the verse that kept popping in my head as one of the scarier monsters of the Bible, is the principalities and powers. And I don't, because when I look culturally at that point, you know, are they deflecting what's going on something outside of themselves? But I sit here and I look at our times now, and I think of the principalities and powers, and I mean, so many of us can name, like especially me from where I grew up, my family, and so many people that I went to school with are now, I don't even recognize them anymore. And this just happened, you know, this has just happened in a certain amount of time. And it's that there's some influence, group influence that's I'm not trying to blame it on something spiritual. It's of man. It's something of man that we're creating. I don't know where I'm trying to go with this, but this is just what's spinning through my head about the time and the age and the apocalyptic feeling of this time, as to where, like, I even think of trying to, I have a friend that I've known her for over 20 years, and we've had her daughter, the foster daughter. We've watched her go up and down, and addiction, you know, be swept clean, be taken over, and be overcome 100 times worse than it was before. And all this just seems so real and happening. Just these words from all that. I don't know where I'm going. I'm just yakking.
No, I think that's good, because part of what I think we're doing is this God is dead era is really like, we really do need somebody to save us, and guess it's got to be us. Because there's no otherworldly figure stepping in and saving anybody in these horror movies, right?
definitely. But you know, the only thing that gives me comfort in all this is because it's already finished. What Jesus has done is already finished. He's already forgave me. He's already gave me eternal life. It's all done.
Yep.
And that gives me comfort. If I sit here and keep trying to say, you know, how am I going to live in this world the next 20 years or whatever I have left? It's like I don't see any hope. It's a machine gone crazy, and it's just tearing up everything. And but the only hope I have is it's already done, and I find comfort in that. And I don't know, it just makes me feel like that when in Peter, where he says, always be prepared to give an answer, you know, in your heart set apart Christ as Lord, but always be prepared to give an answer to anyone who asks you for the hope that you have. Do so with gentleness and respect. I can live in that, and maybe somebody would see that in me and want to know who Jesus is, because this world's going to mess you up.
Yeah. And I think, Todd, that's exactly where our monsters are coming from. That the world is too much. It's too heavy. We've done too much. And there's a different sense of hopelessness, right? Because we've got climate change issues that are causing other issues. We've got wars that we are starting for no random reason. Like we're trying to harm each other. Like there's every facet of life is uncontrollable negativity, and the reversing it and healing it seems impossible. And we really don't have anybody to blame but ourselves, right? Especially in the United States. And that's why I keep pressing our culture. Because the United States, we did this. We are the empire. And so when we're creating our monsters that look like us, that have motives that we understand, who can only be saved by people who look like us, who are trying to destroy people who look like us. It's really about what we're doing to ourselves. And yes, if we keep pointing to Jesus, which I said we weren't going to do this Bible study, that's the way out of this, right? Like, we really do need God to come in and shift us and pull us. But the monsters aren't doing that. So when we're constructing our theologies, when we're teaching, when we're preaching, when we're just thinking about what we believe in the cultural imagination, how do we deal with ourselves as the enemy? In a way that wasn't present in the Bible.
Yeah.
How do we construct a God that says, yes, this is all y'all. I gave you multiple opportunities to not kill the world. And when you kill the world, y'all will die. The world will heal. That's how that's going to work. But I love you. And I save you. And I still love you the same way I loved you then. And I gave my life for you, yes. But y'all really need to stop killing the world. How do we construct that God? How do we talk about that God? That's the constructed theology piece that was on the slide. What do we do? How do we understand God? Looking at the monsters that we create, that are reflections of us. How do we help? How do we write a happy ending into these monster stories? As Christians, point to Jesus if you must. Vanessa, Melissa, Bree is on a district call. She double dutying. Anybody? Danita, Reverend Prince. Anybody got ideas? Or is it just hopeless?
Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm thinking that, first of all, we need to call for a teacher so that we could be taught, so that we can all get on one accord. I'm loving what you're doing tonight. This is my first time coming on your Bible study. and I'm loving what's going on. I'm learning a lot, and I'm taking it in. But if only a few of us are hearing this, and you have the scripture, you have the lesson. I mean, if we don't teach and people have the heart to want to learn about this, then that's going to be the hardest part, I think. And for us to go out and be able to tell others, if we don't have another group or a bigger group of people to spread that word, because people just don't have hope anymore.
Mhm.
There's no hope.
Mhm.
So until we can get teachings out there, get followers of Jesus and not of man, of God and not of man, of humans, I should say, humans, because it goes both ways. So that's just what I think.
Okay, so when I
Not much.
post the link on Facebook
Hmm.
to the YouTube, hit share.
Hmm.
Mhm. Mhm.
Because
Okay.
I do.
You
Go ahead.
you
Yeah.
just said something that gave me hope, Donita, that in today's age, it's like it seems like some of the things that have gotten us so far down is the internet, and it's linked people together in a negative way, and it's maybe like us here, we're linked together in a positive way, and that's not going to, we can stay connected regardless of where we're at physically, and where our teachers are sent or not sent, that we can still connect to our teachers that and grow and spread. That's a great positive in today's world, that we actually need to do it though, and physically share it.
And we do today have people from Kansas City and Dallas and New York and California. Like, this is the whole gamut of the nation here, even though we weren't that many. But Bria said in the chat community, and all of these things are wonderful, but they don't need God. And so I guess that's my homework. Even though this is my last Bible study of the annual conference year, so we ain't meeting next week. But that's my homework, and you don't have to turn it in. But how do you talk about God to give people a sense of hope in this era?
Mhm.
What do you say about God to people who are hopeless?
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah.
Melissa said, how much of it is also an awareness that we're the empire, not the victim? And once we acknowledge that, could we begin to actually walk the way Jesus calls us to? Honestly, Jesus didn't have much to say to the empire at all. Like, Jesus never had a conversation with Romans.
Mhm.
Um, so you have to be at the margins in order to follow Jesus. And we would have to divest of a whole lot to be able
Yeah.
to walk the way Jesus calls us to do.
Yeah.
So it's difficult, and I do think that we do. Yes, Melissa, it's not a dichotomy between empire and those under the empirical thumb, because even within the empire, there's margins. Um, but I think that even looking very clearly at who we are doesn't really provide enough hope, doesn't really say where God is. And I think that's part of the reasons why we have the monsters we do, because we're looking clearly at where we are and who we are. But we're missing the outer edge of that. It says a whole lot about where we are, but our monsters don't say anything about God. And so we have to. So the homework is, what are you saying about God, not about humans? Because the monster movies do that. DC Comics does that poorly. Marvel Universe does that really well. What are you saying about God? And that ends. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah. I'm just kind of, and this is a not well formed thought, but as I was listening and thinking, it just struck me that the ways in which this society has monsterized certain people, right, and classified them as monsters, that those monsters were saying a whole lot about God, right? So when, society monsterizes people like a Fannie Lou Hamer, right? And, and set them up as, is definitely other, right? And that, so that some of these societal created monsters, right, say a whole lot about who we are and who God is. Not everything, right? And maybe not enough. But the whole monster thing is just, I'm just saying, it's like operates on so many multiple levels, right?
Mike, I think that is the most brilliant way to end this because, and I'm just going to do a quick recap. We started with monsters that could come into our communities and cause us to sin and cause God to destroy the world. And then we had monsters that reminded us to be humble and to be careful about how we approach God. Then we had monsters that came from God and pulled us closer to God so that we could do God's bidding. And then we saw monsters everywhere that God was powerless to control. And then we had monsters that not only was God powerless to control, but that if God did something to them, God must be of the monsters because the monsters had that much power. And then we had monsters that were just giant and evil that only God could take care of. And when God did, it signaled the end of the world. And now we need to listen to the monsters to hear the voice of God. And that, I think, is the best conclusion that I didn't think of. But our monsters are pointing to Jesus in a way that monsters before didn't. And maybe that's what we need to tell people is the folks who have been monsterized, the monsters that we find in each other, the monsters that we find in ourselves are saying something about God, and we should shut up and listen. Because the ones who think they're closest to God are talking about themselves a lot and not about God. So listen to the monsters. And Monsters University ended with them learning how to scare. And then Monsters Inc. ended with them learning that laughs were more powerful than fear. So Monsters Seminary ended with us trying to figure out how culture is cooperating with monsters to see God. And now we're learning how to listen to the monsters, to find hope in God in this present age. So that's that. Thank y'all for spending an hour and 48 minutes.
No, this is good.
My little, I want to do something fun to end the conference year. Thank y'all so much for coming and showing up.
Yeah.
I will post the link on YouTube.
Yeah.
On Facebook for y'all to share it if you want. And if you want the slides, let me know because they're available too.
Yeah, I want the slides. Yeah.
Okay. I'll post all of that. Thank y'all so much. Y'all have a fantastic night.
Thank you.
All right. Goodbye.
Thank you, Brandee.